Ready? All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. That's your signal to quiet down there, Rick. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you taking the time and finding your way on this sloppy day down to this corner of the campus to participate in what I hope will be a conversation about some important matters that we're all dealing with. I just wanted to take a minute to well, first I want to thank Harlan and Faculty Senate Executive Committee for agreeing to do this collaboratively. The goal of this session, and we've got a couple others planned, is really to have a forum for there to be open discussion with the Faculty Senate participating, and of course me or my office participating, talking about some of the key issues. So what I've got in mind, is that this idea, we came up with this name of Academic Affairs Faculty Forums. Forum, and I know I could say fora, but it sounds pretentious, so and it doesn't put up that on spell check. It lets me get away with it. But anyway, the idea is it's an opportunity to discuss key issues in an open format. And of course, this isn't the only format. Obviously, the important issues are discussed by the faculty at faculty meetings, come up through their chairs to deans, etc. There's important issues discussed at Faculty Senate, both the formal meetings and the elected members meetings. But I thought it would be valuable to create another format, not to do it very often, but to periodically have an open conversation with the campus. Now, a couple of things. You'll notice there's a man with a camera back there, and I have a microphone on. We're going to try something. We're going to make a recording of this. And so you should be mindful of that when you stand up and say anything, that you are being recorded and that we live in the world now that this could go around the world literally very quickly. So we don't want to be featured on any kind of YouTube funniest academic moments. But my intention to this is that we've created a website. It's on the Provost website. It's a link to it. I'll follow this meeting by sending a note to all the faculty with the link. And the idea is on that link, you'll come to a spot, it'll have some background information. I sent a couple of things out with the invitation to this. I sent the Faculty Senate's memo about signature and emerging programs, and I sent a draft proposal that came out of Pathway 1. Those will be posted on this, they are posted on this website right now. Again, assuming that the tape remains PG-13, that'll get posted on the website. So if people really missed it and say, wow, what a great opportunity, they could watch it. And then on the website, then there's an area for input. So you can type in your comments, thoughts, questions, suggestions, so we can keep the conversation going. And those people who are unable to attend today and have an interest would at least have an opportunity to give some input. So we've scheduled 3 of these for this academic year today. And today's focus is on this signature and emerging programs. We've scheduled one for February 4th, and what I'd like to talk about is retention and graduation. My thinking there is we're in my office in collaboration with the colleges going to focus some attention on issues around retention. And obviously look at the goal of improving our retention rate and improving our 4- and 6-year graduation rates. So what I anticipate that event will be, I'll probably share some data with you about our retention and graduation. We're collecting information now about things that we're doing. And then again, it would just be an opportunity for there to be conversation about what else we might do as a campus and particularly as a faculty to improve retention and graduation. And then we have one scheduled for April Fool's Day. I didn't put a topic yet. We'll see. One possibility is that we'll have a follow-up to this discussion then, assuming that we've made some progress by then. If not, I'm sure there'll be at least one other thing I want to discuss. Or if these are rousing failure, we'll cancel it. But at this point, that's the plan. We'll have something on April 1st. So for today, I want to start talking about, the focus is about this idea of identifying programs that are signature programs for the university or emerging new and exciting programs for the university. And what I have in mind for at least a beginning format is I've shown you two of them, so I have maybe 8 more slides. I'm not going to talk very long. It's really, my intention is to give you background, sort of talk about how we got to today, and then show you just a little bit about my thinking about how we'll move forward in the future. But I don't have a well worked out plan of here's where I see unfolding over the rest of the semester. So if you come to hear what the plan is, I'm sorry, I don't have one. The idea, though, is to lay out sort of here's some thinking that's gone into this up until this point. I'll ask Harlan to, after I kind of summarize my view on things, to share some thoughts about what about this initiative, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about what I see as some challenges and issues that we face as we try to deal with this. And then really what I'd like to have is conversation, questions, comments, suggestions on process. One, how do we move this process forward in a meaningful way? That's mostly what I'm interested in. And then also thoughts about what would be a good outcome on this. How do we know we'd succeeded in this effort? So this idea of identifying signature programs at the university actually has been kicked around for a long time. At least I know my 6 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, I would be asked 2 to 3 times a year, what are your signature programs? And I always had the same response, tell me what you mean by a signature program, and before I give you an answer. And I know they would go back, well, the good ones, or the strong ones, or the ones that are unique. And the more you talk about it, the more difficult I found it to define. So I always resisted answering the question until we figured out what we want. Well, in the Blue Sky strategic plan, there's language about signature programs and also this idea of emerging areas of growth. And I think the language that has us all interested is that the idea is that we'll identify areas that are signature and we'll invest in those areas. And so whenever there's discussion of investment, of course, it brings a lot of attention, and the exercise takes on some real meaning. So I'm sure you've all read carefully your Blue Sky projects. That's in there. It's under Pathway 1. In fact, it's the 3rd bullet point under Pathway 1 in terms of actions, that the provost will work with the faculty to identify signature and emerging areas for priority funding. So, well, what's happened with that? Well, that was assigned to Pathway 1. So this emerged, of course, the plan emerged in that first year of President Ferguson's presidency. Excuse me, last year, the focus was on how do we implement the many strategies in the Blue Sky plan. And the method was to create these pathway teams. And the pathway teams each pathway team focused on the many strategies or initiatives within their pathway. And so Pathway 1 spent some amount of time discussing this. They also spent time on other strategies that fell under the Pathway 1 heading. But it was their assignment. Now, what I saw as sort of an important benchmark during that time period is that midway last year, the Faculty Senate Executive Committee sent a memo to the Pathway 1 with some suggestions about how the campus might go about doing this, and expressing a willingness to help. Now, as I sent you all, or connected to the email inviting you to this, that memo, so if you didn't have time, you can look at it. If you did have time, you can see it's a pretty detailed set of suggestions. I'm going to summarize what I thought were the key things in there. I know some people were here, Harlan in particular, were involved in writing it, others as well, I assume. So you can have your opportunity to correct me. But here's what I saw as some of the key things. That So in the memo, there's a definition offered for what are signature programs. And of course, that's helpful, and a definition distinguishing what would be called key emerging growth areas. Another thing I liked very much in the memo was that there was this idea that we should be looking also at foundational areas. And there was a brief definition offered of what are foundational areas for any kind of research university like ours. What are the areas that are core or are foundational? And so, again, I thought that was an important piece. Another sort of feature of this set of suggestions that came out of the Faculty Senate was this idea that all programs should have a shot, that there should be, the process should be this very open process with the entire university community invited to send forward ideas about their programs and why they would meet these criteria, this definition of signature and or emerging. And there was the, actually, when I reread it last week, I'd forgotten how detailed it was. There's quite a detailed proposal, about 14 components that would go into the proposal, and listing things from faculty, citation references, index, H factors, or whatever other citation measurement you want to use, to I think enrollments, to where the graduates are. Pretty detailed explanation. And then the other piece was that there would be created a signature strength and emerging growth area review panel that would be faculty, mostly from around campus, I think also some administrators, who would weigh out these proposals. So that memo went forward, and again, just to be clear, it went forward from the Faculty Senate exec to Pathway 1 as a set of suggestions about what might happen. Now, I was not a participant in the Pathway 1 meetings, so I can't give you any first-hand account from that. I know there are some people here, at least one, who I know was there. Maybe they can fill us in. But Pathway 1, continued to discuss this, I assume, and by the end of the year had developed a draft proposal for identifying signature initiatives on campus. And you're probably aware there was a leadership change in the provost's office this summer. I got that memo sometime in September, that proposal sometime in September. And so while I sent that out too as an attachment, and you saw that, I want to be clear that that was a proposal that had some specific dates, that was a proposal and it was draft. So if you looked at the dates carefully, you'd see we obviously didn't implement those because about a third of them are passed. But there were some specific ideas. Again, my reading of that, what I saw as I think important features of it, is that the proposal was for how do we identify new, obviously I've quoted, new interdisciplinary areas of excellence. These initiatives are intended to recognize and support new and developing initiatives that will help shape the university's future progress and growth. And then later, the university will invest in signature initiatives through directing new funding into them. So new is a feature of this. Now, so where are we now? So now we're in year 3 of our Blue Sky plan, I guess. And so what's happened in year 3 broadly in terms of implementing the Blue Sky strategic plan is that the president has charged each vice president with being responsible for a certain number of those strategies that were listed out in the strategic plan, and not all lined up by pathways. So under my list of strategies I'm responsible for are things that are in Pathway 1, some in Pathway 3, and some in Pathway 4. And the idea is that this is the way we integrate these strategies and these initiatives into the campus. That we look at either we accomplish them and someone's responsible for ensuring that they're accomplished, or for some of them, I see anyway as ongoing. And actually, I would suggest that this is one that is ongoing. if we decide that a certain area is a signature program of the university, it would be, in my opinion, a mistake to say that's signature for all time immemorial, but that you'd want to revisit this periodically, and you'd certainly want to revisit what's emerging, right? Something can't be emerging for a decade. I suppose it could, but that would be problematic in my view. The charge to us is to build on what came out of the pathways, and so for each of these strategies that I'm responsible for, I've gone back to the chairs of the pathways and said, hey, what have you produced? What work products are there? And that's how I got the information on the signature and emerging areas. And the idea was that while the vice president would be responsible, he or she would not be doing this independently, that you look at groups that involve faculty and other key administrators to serve in advisory and maybe in some cases implementing roles. So with respect to the moving forward, the creation or identification of signature and emerging programs, I have formed what I would like to see as the advisory group to work with me on this, to help me think through how we're going to move this initiative ahead. So there's a lot of names, I'll categorize them for you. So you'll note that I have the academic deans on there. And the academic deans may not even know they're on there, but you're on there, Francois. And I think that from my point of view, and maybe it's a biased point of view given my last job, but I think from my point of view it's very important for that. The deans every year have the challenging task of figuring out what to do with limited and, to be frank, not enough resources, right? And so every year the deans are making difficult decisions in consultation with their faculty and their leadership teams, but about where are we going to invest the funds that we have. And my view is that if we don't have this group playing a central role in thinking about where we're going to invest, we could be working in cross purposes or in different directions. As the dean may say, look, we're developing this is something emerging in my college, and we're not going to invest in that. And the thing that they decide that they're not going to invest in convinces another group that it's a key area or an emerging area. So I think they need to have a voice in this. The Vice President for Research obviously needs a voice and needs to bring in representation or needs to represent the research arm of the university. Janet Waldron, again, she probably won't attend many meetings, but she's a key figure in terms of helping us figure out what we actually have to work with. And then I'd like to have some faculty involved. So Owen Smith and Todd Gabe were on Pathway 1, and when I asked Jake Ward, are there folks who worked on this initiative in Pathway 1 who would be willing to continue? He claims that Todd and Owen volunteered. Todd can let Todd comment on that later. But so anyway, they and then I want to add some additional people, and I've asked the Senate to recommend a couple of people, and then I'd like to reserve the right to name a couple other people. My goal being, I want to make sure that the campus is represented and appropriately. So we'll see what the recommendations come from the Senate, and then we'll look at what else. Harlan just mentioned to me that there have been quite a few people have volunteered, so that's great. What I've suggested, the Senate put forward a couple of names. They'll be on there, and then if they wouldn't mind sharing the other names, then it gives me a nice pool of people who I know are interested that I could potentially choose from. So now, what you might be thinking is, okay, now he's going to say what this committee is going to do, but I don't know, because I want to have some input, I want to have some discussion about it, and actually the committee is obviously not met since it hasn't been all named. But I think there are some important issues that I need to consider, and when I form this advisory group, they need to be considered. And I think they should inform the discussion and the way we think about moving this forward. So let me start with what I would say is the most positive one. So the university is actually in the process of thinking about and doing the preparation work for our next sort of fundraising push. We did the campaign Maine that ended a year or two ago. I guess close to 2 years now. And we learned a lot from doing that campaign. It was the most successful in the university's history, but it was imperfect, and we learned some things. One of the things I think we learned is that we need to do more prep work. So part of what we want to do is to be able to be clear when we develop the case statement that we take out to work with potential donors is what are the areas of the university we want investment in? What are the things we see as our key strengths? What are the things that we think define us that would excite people who might want to give to the university? So the timing of this work is good because I think the timing can inform that discussion that is going to take place over the course of this year. I've already was invited to sort of an informal meeting with folks in development, and we met at Governor's, and over breakfast, they said, okay, well, they had their pens, so tell us what the signature areas are, Jack. And I said, well, just like I said as the dean, tell me what you mean by that. So, but I said, we're working on this process, and hopefully this process can inform what they do. So I think the timing of it is good for that. But my cautionary note is that that's out there. That's if things go well, 3 to 5 years from now, that funds come in from that, meaningful amounts of funds come in from that. So it would be a mistake, I think, if we put a lot of effort into designing things and say, well, great, this is what we're going to do with private giving, because it may or may not happen. That's my experience with it. And two, it's slow to happen. Even the things where you're succeeding, they take time. So on the one hand, I think it's good we're having this kind of conversation, and the timing is good, and it can inform that. On the other hand, I don't think we want to build a plan around that. The second point I want to make is it weighs heavily on my mind, is that we're doing this, and we're thinking again about where we want to invest, but we're still face significant financial challenges at the university, right? So we're not in an area where we won't be cutting the budget for the next few years. My anticipation is we will be cutting the budget over the next few years. We have for 15 years straight. I anticipate that we will over the next couple of years as well. So again, I just bring that up to be mindful that I don't want, one of the things I said to myself as a chair and repeated as a dean and now repeat as a provost, as an administrator, you never want to ask people to work hard on something and nothing's going to come out of it, right? That's not a good administration. So I don't want us to throw ourselves into an effort without understanding sort of the landscape. That if we throw ourselves into an effort to say, let's really identify what are these areas that are exciting for new investment, and there's no new investment, we've not spent our time wisely. So I'm going to be blunt and say, when I look at things, I don't see a lot of new money on the horizon, other than what I've just said about fundraising. And fundraising is all has all the caveats that I already said. But I don't, I would fall over if the legislature said, hey, let's increase the appropriation significantly for the University of Maine system. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the best we could hope for is some kind of increase associated with inflation, and I would be really surprised if that happened. We have a very activist board of trustees who are really keen on this no tuition raise, so I hope that they'll allow us eventually to raise tuition a little bit. But those, I mean, when you think about the big picture of the university, that's 90% roughly of our money is the appropriation and the tuition, and those aren't going to grow anytime soon. Now, tuition will grow a little bit as our enrollment grows, right? But the rate of it's not going to grow in any dramatic way. So, not to be a downer, but I like to be a realist. I think we need to be mindful of that. And again, I'll speak it frankly about what came out of Pathway 1, that draft proposal, was really great if we were sitting in a situation where we said, okay, we're all good, and we've got this new money coming in, let's figure out what's the best way to invest this new money. I don't see that coming up. And then one other factor, and again, I just threw it up there because it's also on my mind, you know, if you haven't heard, there's a contract that may or may not be ratified by the faculty. So that's going to unfold in the next little while. And part of that, if you've read your messages from Jim, is a retirement incentive. And I have no idea, right? I have no idea. Well, actually, I don't know whether it'll be ratified. I hope it will, but I don't know whether it'll be ratified. The contract. But then there's this big question mark of who might take advantage of this retirement incentive. And the timeline for it is, I mean, to be frank, not ideal for this kind of initiative, right? So it's, I think, is it March 15? March 1st, 15? For the first one, then there's another one next October. And so it's just a factor. It's an unknown out there. And again, I don't think I'm saying anything to you all that you don't know. There's a lot of our faculty who are eligible for that incentive, a lot. And again, I have no idea. Maybe none of them will take it, or maybe all, or most likely somewhere in between. But that is a factor. Again, it's this unknown variable that is out there. So I thought I'd mention it. So I've blabbed on a little bit. So what I'm hoping now is that we can have a conversation. I'll repeat what I said earlier. Actually, I didn't mention that Robin is here, and she is going to, she is keeping notes, and we'll post sort of a summary for those who don't want to watch the video. Can read the summary of what we discussed here. We'll post the PowerPoint so people can look at that, and there'll be opportunity to give further input. I will ask you, if you do decide to speak, if you would identify yourself so that everyone else knows who you are. And again, any kind of comments and suggestions are welcome. Let me start, though, by asking Harlan just to make a comment on anything you'd like to comment on.
Sure. I actually, I'm going to take another perspective here.
Okay.
All right, from Jeff. And why did we do what we did within the Faculty Senate? We came up with, well, we established the foundation for a rigorous proposal and, a rigorous process, a rigorous proposal process, a rigorous review process. And why did we do that? Well, as Jeff says, even though there are no guarantees here about funding for designated programs, we've already seen in the literature that if you're so designated, you should be in a favored position for MEIF funding, state of Maine bond funding, private fundraising, as he's mentioned here, limited competition federal proposals, and as well as campus funds for marketing. As well as we've seen with some programs that have been kind of designated as priority programs in the past, we've seen gains in new faculty, we've seen gains in new program space, we've seen new buildings come up for some of these programs, we've seen substantial long-term E&G funds that have been transferred to these programs to support graduate students and PhD students, and the list goes on. There have indeed been substantial funds that have been redirected to these programs in the past. And so this is a concern for the faculty. And particularly the processes. And indeed, the payoff from being designated for one of these programs seems to be far more lucrative and have greater long-term impact than any possible proposal that you could probably submit to NSF or NIH may have far greater benefits for you. And therefore, our particular position was, well, if we're going to do this, then we should have a proposal process that should be at least as rigorous and at least as comprehensive and fair as those proposals that we submit to our funding agencies. What we did is, as Jeff mentioned, in our particular proposal that came out of the Faculty Senate, indeed we laid out what a signature strength program or a signature strength area should be. It's not necessarily one academic program. It could be a multidisciplinary type of drawing from several different programs across campuses, something that you want to put forward to move forward. And so we defined what it meant, and then we went down through that criteria, item by item by item, to say then what should be the documentation then that you would need to show that indeed you meet all these particular criteria. All right. So that when you look at the the appendix that we had there, yes, it is rather long documentation. Yes, it is rather arduous to respond to this, but just because it's arduous, I mean, if you submit a proposal to NSF, what, you got maybe a 1 in 20 chance, what, a 5% chance of getting funding? Does that mean that you shouldn't do it? No, you should do it, and you should go after that particular funding, and you should do your best job, because even if you don't get the funding, it helps you, in your own mind, set forth what the vision should be for your particular program, helps you work it out. Yes, there is a potential pot of gold, and we suggest that there might be a pot of gold here. Maybe it's less than a 5% chance again here, but regardless, we think as faculty members that this would be a worthwhile exercise to put some actual time and effort into this process. So what we laid out then was kind of a level of specificity and a level of rigor of review that very similarly modeled after the types of things that we see with the funding agency. So we were actually kind of taken aback when we saw, and again, we didn't see it until what, the last week or so, of what actually came out of Pathway 1. And at least in my opinion, I think it promotes the development of very short kind of bluster and fluff proposals, requiring very little documentation, accountability, lacking complete credibility in terms of what we would normally expect in a review process, right? I mean, proposing a 2-page concept paper and a general feedback from the campus community, and then a 5-page proposal which would be focused on, quote, a wow factor to impress the public. That's not the standard that we should be pursuing as faculty members across the campus. I got lots of notes here on different things. One thing Jeff mentioned was this review panel. We did the process. So we didn't only put down a form that we think here are the kinds of questions that you need to answer in order to be credible in showing that you are an emerging program or that you are a strength program. We also put down a process for requests for proposals. And we modeled that, in essence, what we've seen that worked well at the National Science Foundation. We had some researchers involved and said, here's what works. We need to do internal review. We need to do external review. Here's a panel process. Here's a good voting process that actually works within a panel type of environment, so we actually come out with recommendations. Our recommendation would be that a review panel like this should be a credible, scholarly, academic review panel, and it should be separate and distinct from this advisory panel. Because if you're a advisory panel, yes, there should be deans on the advisory panel, but if you're on a review panel, essentially you would have to recuse yourself from anything that you have a conflict of interest in, and there's all kinds of conflict of interest for those type of processes. So we need a fair process, we need a transparent process, we need a level playing field for everybody on this campus. We think the effort that would be going into this would be great. People put lots of time and effort into it, but now we've got stories on this campus, and even that in itself, if we had 20 stories, 30 good stories of what people are really holding themselves up to be as strength programs, emerging critical programs for the university, that in itself would be simply a wonderful document in itself to tell our variety of stories at this campus. So I've probably taken more than my time, but that was our perspective coming at it from a faculty senators in making our suggestions to the Blue Sky Pathway Committee.
D.
Dean Eccles, College of Education and Human Development. There seems to be almost two ideas. The one came out of the Pathway 1 their proposal, which is kind of signature initiatives. And then what comes out of Faculty Senate titled, signature programs. And I think about it differently because lots of institutions will go through program prioritization. I mean, every department should kind of engage in program prioritization. In some ways, it sounds like the program prioritization piece or the signature program is more like that. What are the programs within our department that are high, that we rate high, that they are signature ideas or signature programs, that they have great potential? There's external demand for them, there's internal, there's interdisciplinary demand. You could lay out, and the Senate has laid out a lot of the criteria that would be there. When I go back to your slide, the one that was prior to that one with your concerns, Jeff, limited funding. So a lot of times when you engage in program prioritization, there's multiple outcomes. Here are the high priorities. Here are priorities that are kind of in the middle of the level for our department. And then here are low priorities that really have seemed to maybe pass their time, that they are taking resources that aren't really central to the mission of our department, central to the mission of the college, central to the mission of the university, so on and so on. But usually, if you're going to have identified high priority programs, there's a cost, which are low priority programs, and you talk about how you're going to, where the funding is going to go. So you might have a high priority program, a signature program, but doesn't require any additional funding. But it is a signature program within your unit, but its funding is fine. But you might have a high priority program or an emerging program that needs an influx of resources to get to its potential. And then you may have some that are very low priorities within your unit that do not need any resources. Maybe they're taking up too many resources right now, and those resources could be diverted to other areas. So, I mean, to me, what came out of this conversation are two very different things. I mean, it seems like what Faculty Senate's proposing is more, let's identify the signature programs within our units and resource them appropriately. And then what came out of Pathway 1 seems more like these signature kind of ideas or initiatives that, that has nothing to do with a program, but more of a research initiative or idea. I just put that out there.
Other thoughts or questions?
I would say, I mean, that struck me too. We were responding to the Blue Sky plan, and it talked about areas. Okay, it didn't talk about specific programs, but you could have an area across different disciplinary domains that we're going to highlight. I don't know, the Center for, Citizen Science or something, and which would involve several programs. But indeed, that would be a priority for the future of this, signature program and emerging area that we're going to, when it comes to new resources, we're going to funnel those into this particular program. Versus initiatives sounds like a project. That's like a project you submit to NSF, it's limited funding. Well, that implies that there's money there and something available. So I actually like what the Blue Sky Plan actually laid out as opposed to what the Pathway came out with, which was a different idea. If you agree with signature programs to begin with, right? But it appears it's a priority. It's a priority of our Board of Trustees, is what it looks like, across the University of Maine system. They don't want to eat just us. They would like to know this from all the campuses. Well, what are the things that we can promote? What are the things that we can hold out? And so I like the idea of being able to hand them a document saying, well, here's one, here's one, here's one. These are we went through a process. We've got lots of them, but here are probably the highest priority ones.
No, I mean, just respond. I also, I agree with some of the points that Dee's made. What you laid out, what the Faculty Senate leadership laid out was this very comprehensive, program prioritization process that, would potentially, if every unit did it, would somehow, I'm not sure how they get scored, but somehow there's a way for doing that. Let me tell you my couple of reservations about it. And one is what I'd said earlier about asking people to do work and nothing's going to come out of it. There is this thing that I'm putting myself into my department chair when I was a department chair. well, I would feel like I was a lazy slob of a department chair if I didn't get my troops together to put together one of these proposals. You're not doing good by your unit. And so, depending on how you count them, I mean, there's 90, here's an easy way to count. There's 90 undergraduate programs, and there's 70, I think, graduate programs. You know, there's potentially 100, I don't know, 150 ways that you could slice up groups submitting these. That's a lot of work. There's a lot of university faculty resource time put in. Now, again, I understand your arduous for good is, and so I don't think I'm lazy, maybe, but it's a concern that you're asking this broad group of people to do it, and for most of them, not much is going to come out of it. And then my other big reservation about it is that, so even if we decide to do it, and again, these are only reservations, this is not saying, you know, I'm totally against this, is, so you do it, so let's say we throw ourselves into this effort this spring. When do we do it again, right? So, you know, what changes? Faculty leave, trends change. Is this something we plan to do? I don't know. Certainly, it seems like a lot of work to do annually. Biannually, you know, so that's a concern as well. Is that, you know, we throw ourselves in it. Clearly, it's not going to be for all time. Well, as dean, over 6 years, I watched. I'll use an example of computer science. I watched an interest in computer science go like this, and an interest in computer science go like that, over just that small 6-year period. And so I worry a little bit about that too. I just worry about the time it takes for this campus to throw itself into this, and you know, what you know, what are we going to do? How long is this end product? But again, in terms of if we want to say, and part of what I would like to have is this program prioritization. Because I think that is a great outcome from this. You know, as I said, every year we have to deal with making difficult decisions. It often falls on the dean's shoulders. But it would be great to have a prioritization that's very public, so everyone knows we're going to invest in these areas, and by default, we're not going to invest in these other areas.
I think, oh, sorry, repeat that.
Yeah.
I'm Ellie Rosen, Director of the School of Biology and Ecology. I have a couple of questions. One is this a reference to the plan that came out of the faculty senate that identifies the 14 criteria and all that. Is that available somewhere for?
Yeah, it was attached to the email I sent you to invite you here. It's also now posted on the college.
I don't think it was attached to the email.
It was not attached to yours. Was there attached to anybody else's email? We kept it off yours for strategic reasons.
There was links.
Okay. Oh, links. I'm sorry. Maybe it wasn't attached. I'm sorry. It's links.
All right, so I missed that. Okay, well, I can.
Yeah, and right now it's on the Provost website. If you go to Academic Affairs Faculty Forum, click it. The links are there.
Okay,
So.
and same way with the actual, what report or what has come out of Pathway 1?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's marked draft, which is what came out as a
Okay.
draft. Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to comment, and just from the perspective of one of the people, I'm sure most people here have either a great idea or they want to champion a signature program that they're involved in. And I guess for myself, I wonder if there's some happy medium between us, because I do appreciate Jeff's comments about the workload. And I've written NSF grants and spent 2 months, and I'm always thankful that there's a long lag time before I get the response from those agencies for the amount of work that we put in. And I understand that there's a value in the process in of itself, but when you're talking about what a group of faculty that are already, for the most part, overworked to take on something that has low probability. So most funding agencies do have pre-proposals now as part of the process, and so I'm wondering if there might be some happy medium that we can find between there that provides an interim step in the process for initial review before everyone invests the level of detail that you would for a full NSF grant.
Francois.
Sort of just to, I'm Francois Martin at the Honors College. It seems to me that perhaps in the spirit of this happy medium, these ideas of concept papers, I guess the question is, what is the scale of rewards that you get from doing these things? If you're talking about, as happened in the MAPI grants a few years ago, something like a $50,000 sort of influx to help build the whole idea. And then if that was successful over 2 or 3 years, then there was the possibility of that becoming base budgeted and so forth. That seems like you probably wouldn't want to go through this gigantic sort of process, this NSF level kind of review to start that process anyway. Maybe you have a funneling effect where you start with 20 and go down to 10 and so forth. So have some scales of review that would get you down to the best ideas. So I think that's one notion that might be useful. And I think that will also be more dynamic and more able to be done repeatedly and reviewed. So yeah, I guess the only other thing that I would mention is that the research focus, I think, is very important. But I think there are also programs on campus, and as Dean of Honors, which is pretty much an undergraduate program, which has a strong sort of undergraduate research focus, but we can't say that we are focused on one particular area of some science or some, we sort of focus on everything. So is there a way that programs that might not fit the traditional NSF or NIH definition of research could also qualify to be signature programs?
Jim?
Jim McClymer, Physics and Astronomy. I think we're trying to make this too difficult. Faculty get together, we want to have one solution that solves 20 problems. This is not a program prioritization issue. I think that's completely the wrong way to look at it. I think you've identified an issue that needs to be resolved, and I think Ellie and Francois went to. Every program should not feel obligated to try and become a signature program. And they should be clear that it's not something you have to do to avoid not doing your job. Maybe pre-proposals are the way to do it. Some guidance on what really are signature-like programs. So you can say, we're cool, we're what we do, but we're not signature. And then we do need to go through and have it really an open, transparent, so that honors gets to make their case, everyone gets to make their case. And we're not blinded by new and shiny and interdisciplinary. These are not bad things, neither are they necessarily good things. Let each program make its own case based on a rubric, and some rubrics you can say not applicable, and I think we can put in other areas where someone did not envision it, that honors adds something that wasn't envisioned in that. And that way the best ideas come forward.
Okay. Naomi?
I'm Naomi Jacobs. I'm interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and as such I'm currently presiding over an enterprise that includes both programs that anyone would recognize as a signature program and what are referred to as foundational programs in the Faculty Senate document. And I found that an oddity in that document because it gives this sort of one paragraph of lip service to the foundational programs that are necessary to the success of everything else that happens. And then there's nothing more about that. There's nothing really in that document that is appropriate for a program that wants, for instance, to argue for the restoration of resources that would be necessary to strengthen their foundational role within the university. Maybe that's a completely separate program or process, and if so, I think that should be recognized. But to try to make the case for instance, the calculus and math that Nigel Pitt's enterprise is offering or struggling to offer right now on the grounds of these criteria just doesn't fit.
Let me respond to that. One of the questions is how do you tie to and support foundational programs? That was one of the questions. So if you're in engineering and you're putting this in for a signature strength program, and one of the things you really need is better math instruction, then that would then be part of that particular proposal to actually support that particular initiative, that signature strength area. We can't do this without having improved math courses. So that actually was built into the Faculty Senate proposal. Yes, it could have been built stronger. And by the way, our thing wasn't magical.
Really?
There are lots of details that you could change and alter in these particular instances.
Let me respond to that, because I empathize very much with Naomi's situation. And my own view is that I think it needs to be more than that, because what that says is foundational programs are for instructional purposes. And I would argue, I'll use math as an example, that math is more than teaching of math. And if we're going to have strong engineering, physics, science research, we need math researchers, we need math scholars here as well. And yet it's going to be very difficult for our Department of Mathematics. Let me take a different one. Let me choose one randomly that I like, psychology. I'm quite proud of our psychology program. I think it's great. Are we going to say it's signature? Well, it's very hard. There's a lot of great psychology programs in New England, right? So you end up in this sort of odd thing. Are we foundational? Well, I guess we better go for that. But I do think there's some that this idea of foundational needs also further discussion, because I would really like that to be part of what we're thinking about when we're thinking about how do we prioritize resources. Now, we not only prioritize for new and emerging or even our signature strengths without also balancing that against what are foundational. Rick?
I'm Rick Borgman from the business school. What you've described, it seems to me, as a zero-sum game. You're talking about identifying signature programs without new money. What we haven't talked about, although Dee touched on it, are we talking about redistributing resources?
I would say yes. I mean, that's my take on it, Rick. I mean, I don't know how else we can do it. I can't come up with other ways to do it. I'd love to, but I'm not
So
coming
will
up with
this committee also be charged with identifying programs, low-priority programs?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, what I'd said earlier about the committee, you know, what I'd like to charge them with is, hey, help us figure out, you know, what's a good process that will serve this university. My goal would be, what would come out of this would be by the end of this term, so that next fall, when we're making difficult decisions about faculty hires, there's some direction here. We've decided at University of Maine this is going to be a strength area. Maybe it's not a strength department, but it's a strength area, and it requires investment in these areas to get there. But I think really the reality is, by default, if you're not there, then you're not going to get invested in. Because it is, as far as I can see, it's a zero-sum game. So that's really the hard part. And I haven't, to be honest, so my honest answer is, I haven't gotten that far. I mean, people don't want to be on a committee where you say, hey, and by the way, tell us which programs to dump. So, I mean, but I do think looking at signature, emerging, and foundational, and then really it's going to be, okay, what do we do with these other programs? What do we do if they're not things that are unique to us, they're not central to a 21st century research university? What can we afford? What can we not afford? I do think that's going to have to be part of the conversation from my point of view. Max.
I'm Max Agnall from School of Computing and Information Science. Jeff, I think it would be good to separate actually signature from emerging, because I think signature is something that needs to be up and running of national or international prominence, and you would not have that for emerging. Quite the opposite. It would not yet have the strength, but there's a pull factor that it should come up to that level. Mm-hmm. So separate the two things. And then the second thing is, I believe it would also help a lot to have some ideas about how many signature programs and how many emerging programs one is thinking about. Because if you say 2, then this will immediately probably collapse the pool. And if it is 45, then it may have a much larger interest.
No, I think that's a great point. And that may pay into these concept paper idea. If we can identify and figure out, okay, what's reasonable for us to think about here? And what is, I think that's a great point. And then that gives some context for the campus to say, all right, let's look at this in a realistic way.
Emmanuel Ross, Marine Science. I totally support what we just heard, but I think we need to identify signature programs, as you said, for specific purposes. We might have, great programs that do great service for the state. We have others that do great research, others that do amazing teaching, and for those purposes, they need to be identified as well. And I think if we want this campus to improve, we need to think, rather than balkanizing it into small departments that are pockets of excellence, is to hire in between places that are very good and places that need help and are weak. Mm-hmm. And through hiring of people that can do the interdisciplinary and help raise the ones that need the help. And if we only support, I think the whole campus will suffer if we start balkanizing it into what's good and what's bad, and only invest in the good ones. And I think we can use the good ones to help raise the whole campus, or at least change cultures where cultures need to be changed. Think about it as a whole also, not just as parts.
Let's see. Dee?
And just going back to the conversation about program prioritization, I think every college needs to engage in that. I agree kind of with what you were saying about psychology. We've got a lot of excellent programs, I believe, in the College of Education and Human Development, and some of them I would say are high priorities within the college. But I don't know that right now I would say any are signature programs that are specifically unique. There might be a couple that are emerging. There's some emerging ideas. Time will tell if they really are signature, but they still may rank as a high priority within the college. And there's some low priorities, I think, within the college as well. And when we look at resources, it's not just about financial resources. I mean, time and energy. If you hear around the room, we don't have the time to engage in this. I don't have the energy for this. Those are huge resources that we oftentimes fail to recognize. And we place our energy in some of these areas that are low priorities. I mean, we've just went through a department restructuring. And during that process, you realize all of these degrees and all of these certificates that our small little college offers that are hugely resource intensive in the areas of time and energy, not to mention financial. Some of them are replicate degrees and certificates. And I think that when you do program prioritization, you begin to look at ways without losing faculty or cutting programs, but really focusing on what are those priorities within your college. Where can we eventually become a signature? And I really think university-wise, you know, if you said, what is the University of Maine known for? I think those are when you start talking about signature programs. I don't think there's 40 of those. I think there's maybe 5 or 2 that are really what University of Maine is known about. And I think there's very different conversations that are happening. I'm from the College of Education and Human Development. I do not ever expect an influx of money. So I figure if I'm going to get the resources, they're going to be the resources I have before the university takes them back. And you know, I mean, I'm just being sincere, right? So I do need to think about where I'm going to place the priorities with the resources that I have. Anyway.
Ellen.
I just wanted to continue on in the same theme as what Dean said, and that is that, I mean, I guess one of the things that I see a problem is that when you're talking about signature programs, are you talking about the graduate programs and the research mission, or you're talking about the undergraduate programs? And those don't always match. And that's a real challenge for us as a campus building. How do we provide opportunities for faculty that we want to attract here that are areas that they'll succeed in, and they'll build research programs, and they'll have opportunities for graduate students at the same time that we meet the needs of our undergraduate teaching? Because I think that that's a real difficulty that we have here on campus. We have some tremendous, you know, what I would consider signature programs in areas that bring in a lot of external dollars. They support internationally known researchers. They're not always matched up with where our student credit hours are. And so I think as we build, we have to think about, or as we, not rebuild, we're not going to build, but as we shift, we have to think about how do we link those two things.
I think that's a great point, because again, I hypothetically might say, to pander to 2 people in the audience here, the Climate Change Institute is a signature program at the University of Maine. The Honors College is a signature program at the University of Maine. What measuring stick are we going to use that makes a comparison between those meaningful? I have a hard time coming up with a single yardstick that says, yeah, I see how those two on this same set of measures emerge that way. So.
I would think that in order to be successful as an institution, we have to find a way to deal with that issue.
Yeah. Let me get this question. Go ahead, Kim.
Well, she actually hit my point. I was kind of somehow got looped into assessment across the university and also credit transfer between majors or something. And I keep hearing this business about how do we know we have good programs? How do we assess what's being done? I mean, and I know assess is a bad word, but I mean, how do we know that we're doing what we want to do? And so when I read this proposal, this is a great proposal in terms of assessing what you want to do, but how are we going to know that you're doing it and you're doing it well and you're generating a great product that's going out and advertising for the University of Maine? I mean, I would feel better if there was, whatever you want to call it, whichever of these types of programs that people are talking about. How do we know we have what we want?
Yeah. Todd?
Actually, I'm
Okay.
on
Mike?
the committee, so I'll have it later.
Mike?
Mike Kinnison, School of Biology and Ecology. Coming back to the zero-sum game scenario there and the timeline that you were talking about, for a lot of these measures, it seems like the goal here is to have things that are implementable on timescales, 3 to 5 years, without a real input of new resources. It's hard to really identify this as some sort of scenario where you're really going to make certain programs grow markedly in a short period. New hires and things like that all take a while. It sounds to some degree, because it's a zero-sum scenario, that, and correct me if I'm wrong or my impression is wrong, but in some ways it seems like asking for synergistic programs or ways to restructure the resources and strengths that you sort of have in and around campus to some degree to get momentum sooner than later out of organizational structure that we have here, or to change it in some way. So in that sort of framework, I almost think it's less of a devaluation of some programs and rising of others, and it comes back around to bit what Emmanuel was saying again, that if you're really thinking about it in that sort of framework of trying to build off strengths that we have or restructure in ways to get new strengths, then we're hopefully bringing more groups up. But is that a strategy for applying to these, is to really try to apply ways to restructure and rework with what we have than necessarily targeting major growth?
Yes, I would like to see it that way, as opposed to a competition where we separate things. This is what you are, this is what you have to be. Now you live and die on that. You're going to make it or you're not going to make it. I'd rather us figure out some way that's more flexible. We say, well, okay, if I create something that's a collaboration with the business school, and then that floats both boats, does that, raise and change what we do in some meaningful way that serves the university and serves the students? So I would like to see us create some kind of system that doesn't separate people out, but actually promotes that kind of thinking. Go ahead.
Program, not to participate in the program, how could it come back and
Bite you.
bite one? I mean, what we're talking about, if we go through the faculty senate's proposed process, small departments are going to have to invest significant resources to compete in this kind of arena. And that's going to come at other huge costs. And if one doesn't compete in this arena, what are the potential downsides of that?
And that's a great question. I mean, it's such a great question. I don't have the answer, but that is a great point to bring to this committee to discuss. Do we want to create something that you lose if you don't compete? Or do we want to create something that says, okay, fine, you're doing your thing, and you're opting not to do this, and that's okay. So that, I don't know the answer. That'd be something to bring to this group to talk about. Linda.
So I'm Linda Silka from the Margaret Chase Smith Policy Center and School of Economics. And I haven't been here very long, so this is my 5th year. And I'm struck by a lot of the smartest people in the state of Maine are in this room. And that this is, as much of a struggle as this is, there really is a lot of interesting opportunity for innovation that we could think about, if we use the talent here. And so thinking about how to do that is interesting. At the last campus I was at, and I'm old, I've been in academia for 30-some years, my very first year we all got pink slips because they were going to cut things. And every year they cut things. So I think we need to recognize that's what we're in higher ed, but maybe we have some opportunities here to do something that's really pretty interesting, even in a time of real risk and cutbacks. And so if we think about what we could do, we could potentially do some interesting things.
Hi, I'm Licton Molnar. I'm with the new School of Food and Agriculture. An interesting example of what I think we're trying possibly to do here. The key word that I thought was interesting in this proposal was interdisciplinary. And so, Dan, if everybody's linking and forming networks, and that those networks actually comprise the center of excellence or the signature program, it has to do with the capability of our students to communicate, for instance, that then is a program that extends across several different colleges. That in itself may turn into an outcome that everybody can participate in. I like what Emmanuel said about, different groups increasing the capacity of other groups. And maybe this is naive, and I'm also a newbie here. So, but nevertheless, I think that could provide a key for everybody to kind of win with this process.
I'd like to make a comment about, part of the reason of moving this initiative forward and doing it in great detail was witnessing bad examples of the past where some group gets favored above and beyond other groups, gets a new building, gets an extra $100,000. Why did that group get it and nobody else knew about it and nobody else had an opportunity to even compete in these type of environments? Why is one group being held up as a group of excellence when most of the criteria that we would normally use within the academic or scholarly community don't seem to fit that group at all? So part of the point here is that we shouldn't allow, let's say, administrators to make arbitrary and capricious decisions based upon marketability of X, Y, or Z. Let's actually make sure that we have documentation of the credibility of a particular program, that they have a good plan, that they're accountable, and we can measure those things at the end. So whatever the mix is, I mean, I don't really care about classifying as far as emerging this, or I like the networking among different particular programs, the interdisciplinary, great. But the point is that if we want to advance and raise academic and scholarly excellence on this community, then we really do need to meet the standards of academe in selecting whatever we do here in moving forward.
Let me speak in favor of arbitrary and capricious decisions. What might seem arbitrary and capricious, you could change your language and say is opportunistic and innovative. And so, yes, I mean, if each time we make a decision, we say, okay, throw it out to the entire campus, and let's have the campus weigh in. So I'll use a recent example. We just celebrated the opening of the Stewart Commons renovation for now the Wyeth Family Studio Art Center. We didn't have what was the campus-wide competition about what, of all the things we have on campus, what needs teaching space upgrade the most, and let's all compete for that. What we did was we took advantage of an opportunity, $1 million gift from a donor. A faculty member took the initiative, and against what most odds that people thought, got an MTI grant, so then there's leverage, and the arbitrary and capricious administrator says, geez, I can access that $1 million if I put some money into that. So I think it's a little unfair to say that the decisions are arbitrary, capricious, and really kind of wrong, or it implies maybe a certain nefariousness. When it's really another way to look at it is it's being responsive, it's being nimble, it's taking advantage of opportunities when they present themselves to advance the campus.
So again, President of the Faculty Senate, I hear different things, as a representing a particular constituency, and this is certainly what
Sure.
is continually bending my ear.
Roger?
Hi, Roger Scher, Molecular and Biomedical Sciences, and I'm a newbie too, so I'll give a naive question. Following up on Emmanuel and Ellie and some of the others, is there an opportunity here that the Faculty Senate and the Advisory Committee, by having a variety of groups give a proposal, maybe a pre-proposal, that they'd be able to see potential synergies that individual groups that are proposing themselves wouldn't even see?
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd actually be able to then come back with, you know what, you actually are kind of aligned with 2 or 3 other groups that have put in proposals, so we don't need to balkanize you and compete against each other, but this is an opportunity for you to actually have a conversation, and maybe you can become an emerging area.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting idea. So it's some kind of iterative process.
Yeah.
So you ask for something, you get something, you give something back, and you ask for something again. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve.
Steve Shaler, Director of School Force Resources. Just a quick comment on that. That's often what's been done on the F-score program,
Yeah.
to try and get more
That's a good
synergy.
point,
So
yeah.
that's not an
That's a good
unheard of
model, yeah.
process.
Yeah. Good. Other thoughts or questions or comments? Well, we've gone over. Oh no, Fred, you want to?
Fred Savella, Associate Dean, College of Natural Sciences, Forestry and Agriculture. I'm not sure what my comment is. I
just see what comes out.
I'm not sure where I'm going to go with it for sure, but I'm struck. because of my particular position, I'm often really pressured on research to talk about outcomes and impacts. And what I hear here is a lot of discussion about process, some vague notion of what the outcome is, but not really clarity of what the target is. And without the target, I think it's really difficult for people to write proposals, you know, with real conviction, without knowing, without sort of shooting through the haze of things. Now, there could be a lot of different potential acceptable outcomes. They could be related to student recruitment, they could be related to increasing faculty productivity, or changing the culture, or increasing interdisciplinary, or increasing interdisciplinary, if that's a process requirement, may actually be counter to potential outcomes that people would, should they be at the graduate level. You know, I see references to helping the Maine workforce, helping the Maine economy. To me, it needs to move to that level to a degree, even if it's a whole array of potential possible acceptable impacts that you want these new programs to achieve. But I see the vagueness to the whole discussion on that end. And I think without
that's a
that,
very good point.
I don't know where it's going really.
No, I think that's a very good one. That's always my struggle when you say, well, what's signature? Well, you know, what are you after? Todd?
My comment that I was going to make earlier was, we have really good guidelines on what's required in the proposal. So like if I was submitting for an NSF proposal, the guidelines are always the same. It's the RFP that changes. And it almost seems like we need a very well-defined RFP, and then we'll look at it. And we know the 15 criteria that what you're looking for, but we don't know what the program is, because I look at RFPs that come out all the time, and sometimes I submit or I apply, and sometimes I don't. But it doesn't matter whether I apply or not. It's always the same forms. They want a 15-page narrative, and they want, you know, the CVs and all that stuff. But yet it's the RFP that I look at and see whether or not I want to apply. And so I think that's got to be maybe the first priority, is to come up with what's the RFP.
I see another hand.
Scott Johnson, Earth and Climate Sciences. I like that idea, Todd, and it brings back this concept, the notion that we should make sure that people, if there is an RFP, then it's going to be a pretty specific statement that's not going to be applicable campus-wide. And it's important that our faculty don't believe this is some kind of you either win or lose kind of process. There are lots of ways for units to show their value to the University of Maine. And we've been through many years of budget cuts, and I've been involved in every strategic planning process and so on since I've been here for 14 years. And we survive, the strong units survive, so do the weak units, whatever they are. And the other thing I'd like to say here is that each of us is mandated every 7 years to do an external review, and nothing happens, positive or negative, typically as a result of those. Unless they're really bad, I suppose. I've never known anything particular, such as you're going to be folded, or we're going to give you 3 new faculty lines or something. I wonder if there's a different way to put some teeth into the process of thinning out the strong and the not so strong at the University of Maine, but don't make this the process that we do that. And the wording, the language that I saw in these documents was suggested to me. In fact, it said it explicitly that E&G money was not going to be part of this process.
Right, that's the proposal.
Yeah, that's the proposal, I guess, that came out of the faculty senate or out of
Pathway 1.
Pathway 1. I think that's the kind of thing that would help to put the campus at ease on this, because if you start saying that what you're really going to do, because it's going to be 5 years before President Ferguson starts bringing in the hundreds of millions, is that we're going to start shifting the E&G budget from one unit to the next. This is just going to cause, you know, this huge turmoil on campus.
Right. There's also the issue of telling the truth. I mean, I'm worried about not telling the truth, right? I'm worried about saying we're doing one thing, and actually, no, we are moving E&G money. So that's my concern. Other thoughts? Speak against telling the truth, anyone?
It's hard to not pick up the newspaper or turn on the news or I've been to several economic presentations across the state of Maine this year, all kind of pointing the finger at education and the critical importance of education, and how you know, we've got to get better teachers out there. And you know, if I look at external demand and public persona of what needs to happen, you would say that maybe one of our least funded colleges is maybe the most critical. And I think that when you start looking at the criteria for how you're going to evaluate these things, interdisciplinary connections ought to be a criteria that might prioritize something. External demand, you know, might be something that you would say is a criteria. Because I mean, I just don't think at a research institution, a land grant, and it's as prestigious as the University of Maine, that the College of Education and Human Development will necessarily rise up high in those priorities. But if you look at the external factors that say how significantly important it is to Maine's economy, Maine's future, it's hard to ignore that it perhaps is an important investment to make. Just putting my plug in for our college.
It's on tape. Well, thank you all for coming. We went over a little time, and maybe next time I'll schedule more time for this. I really appreciate the conversation. We're going to have notes. I think we kept the tape pretty clean, so we'll post that. And please invite your colleagues and friends to submit their suggestions. So thanks again for coming. Thanks very much.